Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, where today we are talking about the shock transfers that could happen this January. Coming up, we talk about the player that Liverpool could sell for huge money this month.
I think there are some quite, not brutal, but quite severe changes to come at Liverpool relatively soon that won't play so well in the media.
Whether Rashford actually suits AC Milan.
He's up against Rafael Leao. Rashford's a lot better on the break. Leao's a better ball carrier.
And the forward Chelsea will look to bring in. Last year, he ended up with 7 goals and 5 assists in around 1,000 league minutes. Really impressive tally. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Lowdown. And look who is joining myself and McCubbin today. It's Lawrence McKenna, content superstar.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. This is my favourite show on YouTube.
Good man.
Yeah, I love
Thank
the
you.
show. Yeah, I love your guests.
You might just be incredibly polite, but we do appreciate that.
No, this is genuinely, I watch this every week, so it's great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Today we are going to talk about the shock transfers that could happen this January. And normally you do this in maybe the first, second week of the January transfer window, and it feels like, is anything actually really going to happen? But this year, it's really gone off with a bang. I've absolutely loved it so far for a January transfer window. So I think some of these might actually happen. Let's get straight into it, though. Lawrence, why don't you kick off with your first shock transfer?
Well, quite a few of mine are moves where people are basically going to Saudi for a lot of money to dig their own clubs out of financial issues or trying to get their club some sort of value in the market. The first one is Ederson. City, I think, is arguable, didn't have a very good window and haven't had very good windows for quite some time. I think even now that's generally acknowledged that the club themselves are acknowledging that it's not gone the way that they wanted it to. They've missed out on a few of the big targets and they haven't really moved on a few other players that, whilst were great legends of the club for what they've done, haven't been up to the standard they need. And whilst we're seeing Kyle Walker and everyone else going through their drama, Ederson, I think, has for quite a while now had a question mark over his head at City. It's not that I don't think he's the worst goalkeeper in the world, but after I saw Ortega at Anfield, I remember he came on and did a great job, and everyone was sort of saying, wow, surely they just move on this other keeper and bring someone else in. And he's been pushing this for a while now. Most people inside the club generally acknowledge that he should have probably gone in the summer. And, I don't think his performances are particularly dropped off. No one would say he's the reason they've dropped off this season. But I think if you keep influences in the dressing room that maybe feel a little outmoded or they're just becoming a little too familiar with the club, it generally doesn't do them good. And I think Pep is genuinely suffering from that this season. Familiarity breeds contempt. And I don't necessarily think they're contemptuous of him, but I don't know if that top level has been maintained for that exact reason.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, with the Kyle Walker situation as well. Does it feel like, from an outside perspective, and you as a Liverpool fan, Lawrence, would have watched this kind of firsthand, that for so long it felt like City, at least their wider reputation was, they get every transfer right, they're so good in the market. And I think actually a little bit under the surface, it hasn't really been the case, as you say, for a while now. But actually, it was just not being, strangely enough, ruthless, which is something they have been in the past, with the likes of Walker and Ederson that's maybe caught up with them.
I think that, combined with the fact that they have missed out on a few big targets, I think it was generally acknowledged, and especially once we saw Liverpool bid for Bellingham, that Bellingham had told a few people, I'm going to come to your club, you should start pushing for me. And I think City were one of those teams that got wrapped up in that. That would have been a lot of their transfer budget that summer, right? And I think you would have built a rebuild around someone like Jude Bellingham arriving at the club, saying to people like Rodri, well, this will take a bit off your play. You might play in a double pivot, or there might be a more advanced role for you in some way. And I think when that didn't happen, they went in late for Rice, and that ultimately fell through for them. There are a couple of big names that I think you could have hung your hat on and said, if Pep gets his hands on that guy, then it progresses. Arguably now, the idea is more to deconstruct and then reconstruct than constructing as they go, and that's what they're doing this season. So, yeah, I think we're seeing the senior guys basically say, I've played so much football, I can't keep doing this. That's Kyle Walker. I think Rodri was already saying that before he got this injury, and I'm not saying Pep's played him into the ground or blaming Pep for anything, but I think he was saying, I need to be able to rotate with someone. They brought in Nuñez. That wasn't really a realistic rotational player, and they just never took the load off his plate. These are such key positions in Pep's team that he just hasn't been able to rotate or move on. And I think some of them have just gotten a little bit stale, to be frank. And Ederson's one. Equally, I think you'll both acknowledge goalkeepers are becoming more and more important in their role in just playing it around the back. And I think Ederson has lost a bit of that edge more recently, whereas when he first came in, maybe we were a bit misled by the novelty of what he was doing. And now actually what we're seeing is goalkeepers, their 1% margin of passing or just distribution needs to be there in every game.
Yeah, it's not such a USP. It's not so unique anymore, is it?
Agreed.
Mikey,
Yeah.
on City's January transfer window, Marmoush coming in, these two young centre-backs as well, but particularly Marmoush, is that someone that City fans can think this is the guy that's going to guarantee us top 4 this season? Does he go straight into the team? How do you see that one playing?
Hard to say, really, isn't it? Because he's going from one team where he was dovetailing with another striker, wasn't playing as a lone centre forward, coming into a team where, naturally, if this was a summer signing, would have been like, okay, cool, this is the Alvarez replacement to be back up to Erling Haaland. Like, he's not, he's not a winger. Like, he's not a lone centre forward, or at least his best form hasn't been as a lone centre forward. So it's really hard to say. Like, it feels like, will it take Pep, rejigging the tactics to work him into the side? It's a lot of money they've spent on him, and to buy him in January as well. Like, it feels like a transfer from 10 years ago for Man City. It's clearly very talented and a tactically astute player, but not exactly the kind of age profile we're used to seeing with City. It feels a little bit knee-jerk, and I think it's indicative of a wider problem that we've had at City. Is that, as you were alluding to, Loz, the one guy that they got in the last few years was Erling Haaland, and as soon as they signed Erling Haaland, Pep changed the way that they played to suit him, and so demanded different things of players who had excelled in a certain system and were at that point kind of either right at their peak or just over their peak. And now we're 2 years later now, 2.5 years later, and a lot of those players really are past their peak now, and clearly are not. There should have been more. There should have been more players brought in who could buy into Pep's new style of thinking, because he's got one more rebuild in him, doesn't he, Pep? And then, that rebuild's going to then be taken on by whoever the next coach is, and he's going to have them at their peak. Whereas I think Pep, in theory, could have had, another 3, 4, 5 players form the spine of this team, and be winning titles at this moment in time. So I think that's where they've gone wrong. And Omar Marmoush, feels like a bit of a symptom of that. He's not like someone who's going to be a first team starter straight away. City kind of need those players, or at least need players who are going to be the next Rodri or be the next KDB. And maybe they will just have to look into the academy. Like, it feels like James McAtee, like, surely they need to use him more.
They kept him for a reason, by the way.
Yeah, in the second half of the season. Yeah. Pep said he was going to play him a lot and then didn't, which is kind of classic Pep. But I feel like that's where the future may lie for City. The Cole Palmer sale, like, that looks like such a mistake in hindsight. And these are all things we've spoken about before. But like the signing from Palmeiras, I forget his name now.
Vitor Rice.
Vitor Rice, like, he looks really, really promising. And maybe we will see him, start games for City, in the next few months. So like, signings like that are obviously really promising, but it's just a difficult one, isn't it? It's just been such an anomaly of a season for Man City, and it suddenly feels like all the wheels come off and everything. Like, they're not in as bad a place as a lot of people are saying, but I think they're about at least a year behind in what would have been otherwise a very seamless rebuild.
Can I kind of flag something? And this kind of why I like watching the show is I feel like football thinking in general can be a little bit behind the actual curve of where managers obviously is. Managers never going to come out and go, no, my real plan is this. But that's obviously because clubs keep things so obscure for a reason. No one wants to go into the transfer market with everyone knowing who they want, right? Pep tends to piggy, what do you say? Not piggy in the middle, but like you jump over the next level of tactical innovation and go ahead of that tactical innovation. When I look at Marmoush, I see someone who transitions from, what are they, level area 17 and 18, just outside the box, whatever, that half space area meets the edge of the penalty area. He transitions the ball really well from there into the penalty area. And I think Pep was looking for a number of players that could just be dangerous in that area. You got Savio, all these kind of guys. And I think he saw that as the next iteration, but never quite finished that rebuild in the summer. They were a bit obsessed with Florian Wirtz for a while, another player, great at bringing the ball from that area to another. And he needs someone, again, who can dovetail with Haaland. So I think he's slightly ahead of the curve, or he's trying to get himself again ahead so that everyone else has to catch up with City again. And again, maybe that's the same with the centre-backs he's signing. When you look at them play, they don't exactly go, oh, you're a Premier League centre-back ready. It looks like someone who's playing a weird style of football that Pep can mould. And I think that is where City are at the moment. The weird thing that no one seems to be discussing at the moment is, and the same for City, same for Liverpool, it will become the same for Arsenal the more full their squad gets. They're looking at players who match that manager's style. Whereas as football fans are sort of going, well, does he get in the starting 11 or not? That's not these guys' job anymore. They have to be able to rotate 17, 18, 19 players. And I think Pep is, to some extent, some other managers, I think that's why Klopp got out when he did, are struggling to see the amount of extra games added onto their plate, and therefore not having the specialist players that suit what they want to do at their disposal. They're exhausting their players into the ground, and that's why they need more and more players of the Marmoush type and people they can rotate in and out. And why Chelsea, I think ultimately might have been seen as slightly ahead of the curve in the way they built their squad and brought in a manager like Maresca, who essentially said, I'll have 2 guys here, 2 guys here, 2 guys here and 2 guys here. And in a few years' time, people are going to look a little bit stupid for going, what are they doing? It's not an NFL team. Maybe they were slightly ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people sort of questioned Liverpool when they went through that patch of just consistently signing a forward every 6 months. And now it looks like a stroke of genius when there are these extra games in the calendar that are all adapted to English football to varying extents.
Yeah.
And they've now got this super deep bench, whereas City for so long seemed to use sort of 15, 16 players relentlessly. And it is very difficult to replace the caliber that they've been at, replacing De Bruyne eventually, replacing Bernardo Silva eventually. It's not as seamless as people are maybe going to expect. And the player that you really wanted to carry this team into this transition is Phil Foden. And he's had a really bad 6 months. There's no need to go over the top about it, but he's just been nowhere near his best. So it's
been tough for him, by the way. There are private reasons as to why it's been tough for him. And I think a lot of people overlook that in their analysis. The same goes for most people in the Premier League. But I think where we'll really see this kick in is the Club World Cup, when everyone's going to go, all these extra games, all these extra time in your leg. And I think we're going to start to see where football's going, where basically money just buys more tournaments, and that there will be much more physical rigor throughout teams. And suddenly the teams we're building now just look completely obscure compared to the 22, 23-man squads we need.
I think it's a good shout. I mean, look at the lack of depth at Arsenal and how that's holding them back this season.
Completely
for
agree.
Sure. Mikey, right, who's your first shock transfer?
So I've gone for Marcus Rashford. I think,
What?
I know, yeah. Crazy. I mean, he's been spoken about a lot already this month, but it feels like the sort of move that's maybe going to be pretty protractive if it happens this month. Milan, as we record this, are the most likely suitor, but with no Okafor's transfer to Leipzig reportedly off now due to failed medical. There's one less space in that forward line, So now do you think do Milan really, can they justify signing Rashford even on loan, given that they would probably have to cover at least some of his wages going into the rest of the season? Not so sure. I know Okafor is also a centre-forward option, but he's played a lot on the left this season. Obviously, with Conceição only just through the door as well as manager. Still question marks over how that attack's going to function. But from Rashford's perspective, I think any move is good, to be honest. It feels like the perfect time for him to get that loan move away. It feels a little bit like Sancho last season, doesn't it? It feels like the same, kind of very similar story going around, just completely out of favour. It's clear, it's clear as much as he says, he could get back into the side. It's kind of up to him. It's clear that Amorim, doesn't fancy him in the side. And so, I feel like especially a move abroad is just what Rashford needs for his confidence more than anything. The problem is that Milan, he's up against Rafael Leao. And I guess in some ways it's a good time to join because Conceição, hasn't seen enough of Leao yet to be you are going to be the star of this team. Leao has been inconsistent. His creative numbers are better than Rashford's, but his goal scoring numbers have never been much better than Rashford's. They actually profile quite similarly in terms of, expected goals, expected assists. They're quite different options as well. Rashford's a lot better on the break. Leao's a better ball carrier. So yeah, I think it would be a really interesting move for him. Dortmund have also been linked. Obviously, Barca were linked, but I just can't see that happening in Barca's current predicament. And Dortmund also an interesting one. There's another player who's been linked with Dortmund who we're going to talk about later. But they, I think really constantly need reinforcements in attack, and especially on the wings. I think the right wing is probably where they're more in need at the moment. So,
have you been
surprised
by the calibre of club that's been linked with him?
With Rashford?
Yeah.
With
Dortmund,
too high or too
Milan,
low?
Barca. I did not think he'd necessarily get a move to one of those clubs right now.
I agree. I actually totally agree with that.
I think his reputation precedes him a little bit, Rashford. Like, this is still, like, if we're looking at the last 18 months, then yes, it is, it's, I wouldn't say a surprise, but certainly, yeah, they're quite punchy clubs. But then, this is still a player who has hit 17 Premier League goals in 2 different seasons. When he has been on form, he has been amazing. And yeah, you're trading off like 2-3 seasons where you look like, a top Champions League level forward. But the other circumstances around his drop off in form, I think, mean that change of scene in a league like the Bundesliga, where you have far more space to run in behind, somewhere like Italy where physically less taxing, and also quite a big variety in terms of the different managers and the tactics they play. Yeah, I can see it still. I can see it. I think, Barcelona just don't really see why, unless it's a depth option. I don't think Barcelona can really afford to go into the market just for a depth option in attack as well. It's not really where their needs lie. I think, midfield is where they need to focus on long term. I can see that. But yeah, I think Dortmund and Milan, that they seem like the kind of level of club that Rashford could thrive at. It's just a case of whether Rashford is actually a starter at Milan.
If he doesn't perform at those clubs, I think you see it go a level down from that. But realistically, they'll probably have been looking at him and, like you said, assess the output. And it might be a case of what's available at this point for them as well as him. And to an extent, we're sort of moving into this player power, next generation of player power now, where they become almost more like NBA players who get to dictate their own trades than the other way around. And again, it's kind of old school thinking to sort of think, well, he's not in favour at one big club, so no big club's going to want. Not that I'm accusing you of that.
No, go for it.
But okay, well, you terrible take. But I just think, to an extent, Milan probably think, well, we can fix that lifestyle that didn't quite work. But allegedly, according to Amorim at least, it was some of the entourage around him that is still some of the issue. Which I think what he's referring to is the immediate entourage, people who you can't necessarily move on from, are immediately around him. Does that change if he goes to Milan? His positioning on the field definitely changes. So he will thrive in Serie A, and to an extent, I think the fix at the moment is we'll paper over the cracks on the field, get me a couple of goals, and then I'll get a big transfer somewhere next summer. I'll put myself back in the shop window and be away. But I think it was the knee-jerk reaction to what Amorim said that has ultimately harmed him the most. Amorim's played this perfectly.
Yeah.
Ruben Amorim, I think, has just been so flawless coming into United so far. He's rooted out exactly the issues that United were probably scratching their head and going, I have no idea how we move this guy on.
Yeah.
And he's just...
No, absolutely. It was very decisive, wasn't it? I wonder whether the Milan thing is more about motivation, because Rafa Leao, I feel like he's been the best player in that team for a long time now.
Sure, Pulisic is definitely...
Pulisic is up there as well, but I think Leao is more naturally talented,
I
would
agree.
say. And look, they've had some amazing seasons. They've had some down seasons. And sometimes, like, competition for your place is really important for a player.
Yeah, sure.
Especially if you're approaching your peak like Leao. Like, he has the raw ingredients to be one of Europe's best players, but he's not at the moment. And you look at the performances, I know this is a completely different club and scenario and maybe different personalities as well, but Leon Bailey this season, without Moussa Diaby pushing him in the same position, feels like he's had a drop-off. And there's probably countless other examples, like competition for your place and in training and knowing where you stand. So for Rashford to arrive for 6 months, hopefully get Leao back to title-winning form from a couple of years ago, that could be more beneficial to the team than just the fact that you have to pay Rashford's part of his wages for 6 months.
Also, Milan just aren't that high level of club at this moment in time. They're pretty far out of the Serie A title race compared to a lot of their contemporaries. Like, they could do with a jolt. If wages aren't a huge, if they can make the wages work, if they can make a deal work with United in that sense, I think it is good for them. I think also you have to think about, like, I know it's only a loan, but the commercial side of things, like Rashford, in mainland Europe, like, Rashford is still like a shiny English forward, commercially a very, very attractive player. He's a role model, all these things. He's got an amazing image to him, even if there have been issues off the field at United.
And he's joining a bunch of Premier League or former Premier
young
League
Milan fans will love it. Like, young Milan fans will be buying his shirt.
The one other thing I'm really surprised about is that with Napoli looking at their side of the field and seeing a superstar leave on that side, that Conte, having revived a couple of other careers from ex-United players, didn't go, well, maybe it's worth a punt on that side as well.
That leads in pretty beautifully to my first shot transfer, which is Alejandro Garnacho to Napoli.
Can I just say, this is why I love this show.
Yeah.
Is because he mega brains things and then comes in and drops it just like, I was showering and I just thought of this.
I had no idea that McCubbs was going to lead with Rashford, but it does work pretty perfectly because, Rashford's not the only player being strongly linked to the move out of United. United have massive PSR issues. They've overspent on players consistently over the last few years, players that didn't have that long a future at Man United, like Casemiro. They've fired a number of managers, firing and hiring, or sacking Ten Hag and hiring Amorim cost around £23 million. United haven't been in the Champions League for years. You get all the logistics of why they're struggling. Garnacho effectively is as close to pure profit without being an academy graduate as he can be. I think he was signed for about £500,000. They are supposedly looking for €50 million to even consider this. There's varying reports about whether he would be sold by United, but as far as I'm concerned, like, if you get €50 million for Garnacho in this system, I think it is probably worth it, to be totally honest.
Nationality suits?
Yeah, absolutely. Joining a club which is defined by their success with Maradona, replacing Kvaratskhelia, who's going to PSG by all accounts, although by the time this video goes live, maybe that would have changed, maybe it would have collapsed, but it does feel like PSG is his first option. Yeah. And look, Kvicha Kvaratskhelia is ahead of Garnacho right now, but Garnacho is a really talented player. Like, he had an amazing year last year, which kind of rescued Ten Hag. I mean, ultimately, it only lasted a few more months, but him and Mainoo's emergence was one of the key reasons behind it. Ending up with 10 goals and 5 assists, and he's only just turned 20. That's a really pretty impressive campaign.
And alongside the other pieces they've got there, I think a lot of people probably didn't think McTominay would do this well, but I think also a lot of people aren't surprised that he's gone away and shown the ability that most people at United knew he had, which is why they stuck with him for such a long time. With the big hole in the side there, it's a bit of a different experience to what Rashford will have. It's going to be his position if he came in, essentially, and he'll be playing alongside other players who are going for a title. It's not like he's going in at Napoli and going, let's get Champions League. He's going in at Napoli to go up against Inter and the other names in the mix there at the top, but essentially Inter, to win something here. I think that's massive for him. And again, an Argentine going there and doing something like that. I mean, you can't overlook these kind of things, I think.
For sure. The emotional ties are there as well. And people watching this might be like, why is he swapping a 3 at the back system to join Conte? Well, Conte's Napoli, for the first time, probably since I think Conte's first year at Juve, they're playing 4-3-3. Yeah. I don't know what's happened to Conte, but he's going for it, or a little bit more than usual. And if Kvicha Kvaratskhelia leaves, he'll be playing on the other wing to David Neres, who's having quite a good little time of it as well, for the first time really in the forefront of European football since his days at Ajax. Lukaku's looking really trim, really sharp as well. Probably doesn't have the goals to reflect how well he's playing. McTominay, as you say, playing behind him. Billy Gilmour's had experience in the Premier League. Like, there's pieces there to make this adaptation quite easy for him. Kvaratskhelia to Garnacho is quite a drop-off immediately, in my personal opinion. But Garnacho has the potential to be a really, really top player as well.
Ceiling's higher for him, not than Kvaratskhelia, but I think, where he's at United at the moment. You can swap it.
100%. Yeah. I think people were quite ambitiously and, maybe dreaming a scenario where he was going to play wing-back for United. I didn't really ever see that coming, to be honest. He doesn't necessarily have the cuteness to play as one of those inverted 10s, and he doesn't have the width that he so thrived in last year. And yeah, I think he could really make this a big success at Napoli. So I actually hope this happens kind of for United's sake as well, because he's a spare part at the moment. Get €50 million. Look, it might look a little bit cheap in a couple of years, but it's still a significant fee when you're in financial issues. So
even if they didn't get the transfer, I think getting him out the club and getting him in the transfer market, someone else comes in the summer and they want that fee possibly. I think that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's purely based on that, isn't it? If United can get someone in who is, one of the 2 or 3 best players available to Amorim to play behind the striker, or even if that goes into the kitty for a more suitable striker for Amorim's system, then I think it works. There's just always that fear with United of, sold them for a fairly favourable fee from the perspective of the buying club, and then 2 years' time, Amorim's not actually here anymore, that the experiment didn't quite work, and actually we're going to go back to a far more conventional system. Sure. We're going to we want to play counter-attacking football with wingers, and suddenly it's like, well, we had that guy. A little bit like Sancho leaving in the summer, and suddenly Amorim coming in. You
run the risk of that when you hire someone that is so set in a 3 at the back.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's just indicative of United in general, that despite all the changes, they still went for a manager who's going to demand a completely new set of players to who's gone before. Well, let's see. To be fair, I feel like he's done a pretty good job with the wing back so far, despite not having the profile of player that he needs. So you do have to give Amorim credit, but that's just always the fear, I think, with United, especially with someone like Garnacho who's so young. But yeah, 50 million euros or above, like 60 million 60, 70 million was really like what Garnacho's potential could be. Given that United signed him for a lot less to get him into the academy, it would be the biggest profit they've made on a player, I think, in the post-Fergie era.
Yeah, McTominay was one of the first sales above 20 million euros for years, I seem to remember. So let's see what happens there. We're all quite a big fan of it for varying different reasons. I think McCoven may be a little bit more sad than we are. Lawrence, your next one.
I don't know about why I have so many Saudi rumours. I'm certainly not on the tape.
Position to be in.
My paymasters are telling me to say it's potentially Nuñez to Saudi.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only place where Liverpool are going to recover anything near the fee that they spent on him. It's one of the only places right now that sort of makes sense for both sides. But it doesn't. For me, it doesn't really make sense for Nuñez unless it is a stopgap for him. He's still very young, though. I think a lot of people do forget that about him. I think when he came in, they expected him to be that finished article. Ultimately, it's the relationship between the club and him isn't really damaged, but we don't see him in the same way as we saw him under Klopp, because he feels like a very Klopp profile, and Klopp had a very clear idea with him last season. It was very clear what he was. This season, I don't really know where he fits into this Slot side. There's a lot of Liverpool fans, by the way, in my comments on my channel and plenty of other places who, ride or die for him for a very unusual reason. I'm still not quite sure why. Maybe his passion. I think very often passion gets you a lot of love online. But his actual output and the way that he uses Salah as a safety blanket on the field, which is just an outpass all the time, worries me as a Liverpool fan. Whenever I see him get the ball in any position, frankly, but further down the field, where a striker should be able to play, I see the move break down. And I don't want to put he's still a young guy. I don't want to put too much pressure on him. I feel bad for him that he's in this position. But also, from a pragmatic point of view, Liverpool are going for a title and they need someone who they can see as slick and able to get the ball through. And they need another option. So if they can cash in. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't at this point. Even if it means promoting Jadon Danns, even if it whatever it means.
In the FA Cup.
He was great in the FA. And arguably, again, the argument is he only did well against lower league opposition. Well, Nuñez didn't even score against lower league opposition. So, what are we saying here? Chiesa seemingly coming back to fitness. Will we look at Chiesa maybe as like a false 9 through the middle? Luis Diaz is very happy seemingly to play that position at the moment anyway. Jota coming back to fitness. I wouldn't feel uncomfortable letting him go. And that's not me saying I don't think he's a good player. It's just me saying I think he profiles completely the opposite of what I would imagine Slot wants right now. So if we can cash in and get 70 or whatever million for him.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think even taking a slight loss on Nuñez, given that Slot doesn't seem to trust him fully, it would be mad. Like, you'd essentially be making a small loss on a player who hasn't been a starter at Liverpool really. Like, even last season wasn't a starter every week under Klopp. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, he's at a good age to get to get a kind of fee like that. But I guess it's down to him really. Do you at 25 years old make that move to Saudi? Because you don't see many players come back from Saudi. Like, not that he wouldn't be capable of it, but it just feels like, look at someone like Gabri Veiga, who went there from Celta Vigo when he was being, touted as, one of the next big things in European football. Like, we haven't seen too many, links of European clubs coming back in for him, even though I'm sure he still has a really high ability.
That's not really my concern, frankly.
But it is, yeah, sure. But it is a career risk for him, right?
For sure, yeah.
So and then you don't see, there's no one else. There's no European clubs that come in for him for that kind of price.
Generational wealth, though, I suppose, is one thing.
Oh, massively.
As crass as that might feel,
no.
I suppose, but also, depending on how the length of your contract, say you take 2 years, you're suddenly 27, you run that contract down in Saudi, or Saudi say, well, we do want to sell you. Either you're re-entering the European market with a massive sign-on fee at probably Juventus, and then there's that, or Barca or someone like that, or you're getting sold back and you've got your option. I'm not saying it's a win for him, but I think at the moment, considering what's going on at Liverpool, it could turn relatively quickly, and I think Liverpool really do need to push on for the title, because they need to show other people this is a project worth being part of. Because we were all saying it before, I think there are some quite, not brutal, but quite severe changes to come at Liverpool relatively soon that won't play so well in the media. And I think with that there comes some other consequences, one of which means some players go, do I really want to go there?
So what changes are those, would you say?
Well, there are a lot of positions where goalkeeper's going to be changed very soon. They're going to have Mamardashvili there. Virgil van Dijk probably does re-sign a contract, fair enough, but you're still going to have to transition him out the team over the next 2 to 3 seasons. And Konate, he's been fantastic this season when he's been on the field. Fair. Trent, I think Trent will probably re-sign a contract at Liverpool. There's a rogue shout considering the media at the moment, but we've seen the reaction. In centre midfield, Gravenberch and McAllister both been great, but I do think we see the manager will move on from one of them. And it might be that he says, I thought you were both great for what I needed in that moment, but actually there's a player that fits better. Sadly, Zubimendi's gone to Arsenal for Liverpool, but, that kind of profile. The number 10 position, I don't think Szoboszlai or Curtis Jones have particularly locked it down as good as they've been there. So they've both had their moments. Yeah, exactly. Szoboszlai's not contributed enough goals, but he's contributed enough energy. And Curtis Jones has contributed control, but maybe not enough. There's moments where you could take an edge off. Left wing, locked down for a moment. Let's leave that there. But Luis Diaz at some point, I think, goes to the continent. Striker, no one's locked that position down, even though Jota's done an admirable job of trying to do that whilst being injured. And Mo Salah, I think ultimately he stays. But again, you're transitioning him in the next few years. It's a reality that I don't think many fans have really considered yet, because they've been so in the moment and shocked by what Slot has done. They're almost in a euphoria, which I think just makes you think, well, let's just concentrate on winning the title now. But the reality will hit soon, I think. And there is only so long that wave of Klopp having put this team together, the team suiting the current style of football, other managers leapfrogging you and then going, right, we're in the next wave of tactics now, where are you? And Slot's going to have to be brutal and say, I've got to join that wave, rather than, hey, we've just got a good team. That's not the way football works. You can't just have a good team. Barcelona, Real Madrid, City, Liverpool, Arsenal, none of them all just have a good team anymore, but all of them have good squads. So it's just not the way it works. Liverpool are going to have to be brutal in the transfer market. And I think it's not going to be a shock, but I think you'll look back at this team and go, right, okay, there were a few guys who maybe weren't suited. Yeah, you just fool yourself in the moment. Is what I'm saying, and it's nice to be romantic, but
for sure.
I guess speaking of which, my next pick is a story that's died down a lot now. But last week, Harvey Elliott's name was all over the place in terms of being linked to Brighton, being linked to Borussia Dortmund as well. And I think he is. Well, I think there's a lot of upside. A little bit with Nuñez. If Elliott is not going to be considered as the backup to Salah on the right, or the backup to Szoboszlai in the centre, then I don't really see where he fits in this Liverpool team anymore.
I agree.
And I think particularly under Slot, I think under Klopp it was like, well, he's that kind of right. He almost felt like a kind of, like a Henderson replacement, under Klopp, in terms of like, he played so well on the right of that midfield in that he was very combative but also very creative. He was just, he was able to create chaos and also benefit from the chaos that was created around him, Elliott. Able to pop up with screamers in the moment, able to turn games on its head, and just had that tenacity. And I think he can still bring that to, he could still bring that to Liverpool, but like it's just not where he's at right now. That the timing of his injury, I think, was really bad. We were speaking about it on the transfer show the other day, and like at 21 years old, he just needs game time. Like this is the sort of time in your career where if you're not starting every game, no matter what caliber of club you're at, you kind of need to start getting it. Like Cole Palmer, like his move to Chelsea came at the perfect time. Like Harvey Elliott is at the age right now that Cole Palmer was a year ago, and Harvey Elliott as a teenager was rated as highly as Cole Palmer. And yes, he hasn't been as lucky with injuries, but like he has still been like a key player to a Jurgen Klopp team at points. Even if he was never, starting week in, week out, he was still utilised a lot by Klopp. The problem is that like you look at a team like Brighton, in fact, you look at a lot of teams in the top half of the Premier League, and there isn't necessarily like a hole to be filled there. Brighton, like Minter and Adingra on the right, you've got João Pedro and Rutter in the middle. Like, there's not a clear space for him, even though I think, he is arguably better than both Minter and Adingra. Like, there's not that much of a reason for Brighton to be like, we're gonna pour a lot of resource into that area, unless maybe they were to sell one of them and bring Elliott in for a similar price. It's hard to see that happening. Whereas Dortmund, I think there is a space there, right? Marlon's gone to Aston Villa, Karam Adeyemi, whether it's fitness or just general form, has not become the player that we thought that he would. Amazing pace on the right wing, but I think Harvey Elliott is a more well-rounded player. I think he can add a lot more tenacity to them in general. He can provide a top quality backup to Julian Brandt, who has to do so much creative work. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's one of the things that's been thrown at Nuri Sahin's Dortmund this season, is they just haven't been mean enough in midfield, and I think Harvey Elliott can provide some of that bite. I think that move makes a lot of sense.
I don't like that as a Liverpool fan. Broadly, we love him as a fan base. It's not quite cult status, but we appreciate. There's a few times where I've been at the stadium where I was at the Burnley game a couple of seasons ago, and the Burnley players really kicking him, and everyone loves at Liverpool an underdog, and he was riding those tackles. He was on the floor getting kicked, getting back up and riling fans up. It wins you favour. To an extent, that's passing the eye test. What I think is weird is not weird even, but from outside the club, he doesn't pass the eye test because there is one element that is relatively small for a frontline player in the modern game. And with people moving towards big, powerful, athletic players, people tend to therefore misprofile him slightly. And one thing I think you probably appreciate on this show is, even if he doesn't pass the eye test every game, I think the reason Liverpool love him is it's the stats columns. They go, well, you came away with the golden assist. You changed the game. So they don't care broadly if the wave of narrative of going with you in that moment. Klopp was very patient with him because I think they saw something in him that he manipulates and changes games and can be very, like you said, that gritty nature to what he has. But it's the small assessment, that doesn't always mean that people from the outside see that. I think a lot of people then go, okay, wherever you go, it's going to be seen as a step down. And I think because he so highly rates himself, rightly so, he's a great player. People would maybe think he's almost too arrogant to go somewhere else. They worry that the narrative changes if he does go to a Brighton or even a Bournemouth or a Dortmund, and that suddenly everyone's talking about him in the same way they're talking about Adeyemi, or it's, well, you've sort of fallen off the radar a little bit, whatever it is. That, I guess, is where people question it. But frankly, if he backs himself, then you're talking about the right kind of move. Because
but also Dortmund is still, I think, it's also, I think somewhere like Dortmund's an easier place to go because we've seen it. We've seen Jadon Sancho's 2 stints there, which were highly successful.
Right.
This is still a team that, this is still a Champions League team that should expect, they're 9th in the Champions League table at the moment. They should expect to qualify automatically.
It's English arrogance, by the way, more that I'm talking about.
Oh, right,
than the actual the reality of it. I think once the media don't see you in Match of the Day, they sort of go, well, he can't be as good as he must have been before. But I think you're totally right.
But then equally, the English media are also, if you have 2 months of not starting, look at Phil Foden this season. The narrative around him, he won PFA Player of the Year last year. Even if you're not starting, even if it's at a title-winning side, the same narrative goes around. I think there is more openness to English players. Especially compared to 6-7 years ago, English players going abroad to kickstart their careers again, especially young players. I think there's a lot more respect attached to it, to the point where it's almost like on here, I'm just like, oh yeah, Dortmund, that seems like the right thing to do. It might not, it might not be. Like, Dortmund have been in a bit of a transitional phase for a while now, but I certainly think he's the kind of profile that Dortmund could do within their squad. I think. Young players are a lot more ballsy in terms of their career choices now.
Chelsea signing Cole Palmer, I actually probably would have said Chelsea would be a great landing spot for someone like Harvey Elliott, and they were in a spate of signing players who played roughly in that position. And now, obviously, I don't think he walks into that team, and that's maybe his issue. I think the sticking point, as far as I've been told at Liverpool, is he wants to start. He wants to be one of those main people. And like I said, rightly so. But the problem is the people who start ahead of him are genuinely a generational player in the Premier League, and Curtis Jones, local lad, and then someone who brings energy that possibly Harvey can't quite bring. So he's in a he's in a catch-22 almost.
Yeah, he is. I like the Dortmund move for sure. I think a lot of their forwards are exceptional physical specimen, but maybe not, at least I'm not insulting their intelligence, but don't play always with vision at the forefront of their game. Seemingly there's a lot of kind of like headless chickenness about Marlon and Adeyemi to some extent as well. So Harvey Elliott with this kind of cuteness, who seems like he's not a physical player. He's just not a physical player in any shape of the word. I think he'd actually be a really good addition there, especially with Brandt and Ben Spaini being their main creators this year. Like, you need more creativity on the side.
Yeah, you're right. The cuteness is really smart.
But then he also brings the energy, doesn't he? Even if he's not like got as much physicality, I think he can still thrive in that sense.
He'll surprise you, is what I would say. I think very often players knock up against him and sort of go, oh, this kid's actually a bit stronger than I thought. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
He holds his weight well.
Yeah.
Well, on the topic of Germany, there are a potential transfer swap in the offing, with Mathys Tel going from Bayern Munich to Chelsea. And this is actually not, from the information we've got as we record this, not a direct swap deal, but there are 2 players changing clubs, but not necessarily in the same deal, if that makes sense. Chelsea are supposedly asking for 70 million euros for Christopher Nkunku, and they want Mathys Tel. Now, this is really interesting, I think, for a number of reasons, because it feels pretty brutal on Nkunku in some respects. Like, he arrived under Pochettino, was injured for the vast majority of last year. I think he missed 48 games. This year, he's barely got a look in the Premier League, but actually his goal-scoring records, I think, been really impressive in a variety of competitions. I think he's on 13. He's Chelsea's joint top goal scorer. Yes, I think 2 came in Conference League qualifying, 5 are in the Conference League main competition. But generally, when he's been given a run of games in that level of competition, he's done well. Nicolas Jackson hasn't been in the best form, I would say, over the festive period, or at least over the last 4 games. I think he's on a 4-game scoreless run, and Chelsea have slightly hit the straps, at least as we record this, prior to their fixture this week, and Nkunku still isn't getting that opportunity really by Maresca in the Premier League. Christopher Nkunku and Mathys Tel are at quite different ends of their career, even though Christopher Nkunku's only 27. Mathys Tel's still only 19. He signed for Bayern as a 17-year-old. They spent nearly 30 million euros on him. And he was very much a bit part player in his first year. But last year, he ended up with 7 goals and 5 assists and around 1,000 league minutes. Really, really impressive tally. And obviously, he is playing behind Harry Kane in the same way that Joshua Zirkzee struggled to break into the Bayern Munich team when Lewandowski was there. When there is one of those global stars playing in your position, commonly accepted one of the best strikers of the last 10 years, it's not a slight on you if you can't get in there, especially when their wing talent is Sane, Coman, Gnabry, Elise. He can't play as a 10 because there's Musiala there, Müller, which is why I slightly think that Bayern might be a little bit of a, you can even really call them an underdog because they're Bayern Munich, but I think they could have a decent chance at the Champions League because of that firepower. I mean, as we were talking about with Liverpool in forward areas. So Tel doesn't feel like he's going to get regular football at Bayern. And if you can swap Christopher Nkunku for Mathys Tel and, say, spend an extra 30 million euros, that's not a disastrous move from Bayern's perspective. Nkunku was amazing at RB Leipzig. Amazing. He was brilliant. I'm sad if he does leave the Premier League that there's going to be a generation of people going, Bundesliga tax. Because that is just the most frustrating phrase I've ever heard. Like, look at De Bruyne and Son and Firmino. And yes, Werner and Havertz and Sancho to some extent and Nkunku won't have hit the same levels. But that does not mean they are poor players. Chelsea, I think if they are, like, even Nkunku's considered quite old for that squad now, given the crazy state of the average age of that squad. If you can swap Tel for Nkunku, who's clearly not favourable in Maresca, I don't think that's a bad move. And from a Bayern perspective, if you can spend 35 million euros on someone who's more ready-made to hit the ground running at Bayern, who company clearly rates, I don't think that's a bad move either. So I feel like it's a move with almost no losers, this. I mean, Mikey, do you see Mathys Tel having a better chance of game time at Chelsea? Do you think he is the player that can play regularly instead of Nicolas Jackson?
I think he's certainly got a better chance than against Harry Kane. Like I think that's that was always part of the problem with Bayern spending so much money on Kane was that they've spent this much money on a player who's like right in his prime. Like there's just no way you can get in, and it's the same problem they had with when Lewandowski was there. It's just like Mathys Tel's had an impossible task in that sense. And he can play on the left as well. I know they're pretty well stocked there. Following on from what you were saying, Loz, earlier, Chelsea's squad building seems to be bearing fruit now under Maresca, especially in terms of being able to navigate two different competitions with ease. And also it's an investment for the future, isn't it? If it doesn't quite come off, then like with Nkunku, they can probably recoup most of the fee or even more than the fee if they're able to negotiate correctly. I quite like it. Just quickly before we wrap up, there are a couple of other moves that have been rumoured this week that I kind of wanted to go through. A little because I just feel like otherwise we could carry on talking about these moves, but I did want to touch upon, especially in light of the news this week with Gabby Jesus' injury at Arsenal, the Vlahovic links now to Arsenal, especially given 2 years ago he was very, very strongly linked with them.
I've been touting this for a while.
Would you be a fan of this move in January, Vlahovic to Arsenal?
I think Vlahovic has kind of been trying to work his way out of Juve for about 2 years now, hasn't he? Like, I think at one point he was on for PSG, and the PSG ultras nixed the move. They literally protested against him being a PSG player for political reasons. Then he was kind of touted around a little bit by Juve, and then they realised, well, there's no one else that we can kind of get in to replace him, so let's keep him for a little while. But when I went to the Turin derby, not the last one, but the one before, I loved the space he took up and thought, when you're an outball in the Premier League. It's a weird one, but in the way that Brentford want to play a big man, or did when they had a big man, I think they could do a similar thing, it's silly to say it, but at Arsenal, where they don't necessarily have someone the ball always sticks to right now, but then can then turn and go down the field. And they want to bring in their two wingers. Vlahovic was exceptional at that at Juve, and at just being a real bother for the whole game. And he's got some really great goals in him and pops up seemingly in some of these occasions where it's not as consistently as I think a lot of people think he maybe does. But he's certainly someone who I think if he was to come in at Arsenal, I think he's a great physical profile for the Premier League. I think in terms of his hold-up play and his distribution, he'd be great for the guys around him. And I also think other people would play off him really nicely in that team. I think maybe I was kind of working out whether Marino was meant to be somewhat that in this Arsenal team, but he's not really had that. Maybe they need to be a bit further down the field. And I think they do need someone who's more of a striker.
Yeah.
And he's at least that. And again, it is quite a limited market in terms of affordable strikers that are out there right now. A run in the Arsenal team makes sense to me.
Feels like there always is, yeah. Well, would you be?
I think it's really fee dependent. I don't think he's the caliber of striker to get you from competing for the Premier League and Champions League to winning it. If I'm totally honest,
how much would you pay for him?
50 million, 50 million, 60 million max.
Probably 60 with January, right?
Yeah. I just think they can do. I think they can do slightly better. I think he's quite inconsistent. I think when he's on it, there are some really amazing finishes, and he's a real box presence. But there is this slightly Haaland style of he's not particularly involved in build-up play. It's very different to what we've seen before with Arsenal. And do you expect the upturn of like a natural finisher to compensate for the fact that he can go very cold for fairly long stretches?
And is that not Arsenal's other? I guess I've just described why I would take him, but is that not also Arsenal's big issue right now? They need someone to come off the bench and be someone they go consistently. We can rely on you to change the game.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they do need the regularity. The thing is, like Alexander Isak. I mean, Alan Shearer on Match of the Day talked about 150 million pounds for Alexander Isak. That's completely unrealistic. But Alexander Isak feels like he's going to cost at least 100 million euros. Osimhen is probably, if I got the choice between Osimhen and Vlahovic, I'm going for Osimhen every time, personally.
Yeah.
Despite the year in Turkey, I just still think that's the one to go for, and he'll be cheaper.
New teeth,
well.
New hair, it's great.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, Calvert-Lewin to West Ham. Saw this rumour. I can't see it happening, but do you think...
Calvert-Lewin, I put it on Twitter about a week ago. I'm always surprised by the calibre of clubs that are linked with Dominic Calvert-Lewin. No disrespect to him. I just don't think he's been anywhere near it for the last few years. I think he's underperformed his XG by 16 in the last 5. I think he's scored in that time 16 league goals in his last 4 years. Like, there's just nothing to really base on the fact that he is ready to go to a Premier League club that are doing better than Everton at the moment and really turn it around. And yes, the service will be completely different level at even West Ham to Everton. Like, I do feel sorry for any Everton striker, but I think he might need to drop down a league, if I'm totally honest.
I don't know. I'd have faith in Potter to maybe turn things around with him. Probably the best quality manager he would have had since Ancelotti, Graham Potter, at least in an attacking sense.
David Moyes.
David Moyes, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I like. Would David Moyes be happy just to let him go? I know he's out of contract in the summer, but like midway through the season, at a pretty crucial point. Kyle Walker to Inter.
Lawrence, what are you different?
I think he has to go to another club where he can get away from the English ire. So I think it works in that sense. I think Pep's run him into the ground, and I just don't know if he has the intensity to play for an Inter team where he's going to have a lot asked of him. Would he probably accept a bit of a bit part role? Yeah, but is it going to be it's not a drop down to go to Inter, but I think the role that Inter would give him would be the drop down, I guess. Maybe it's a slightly slower pace of football for him, but broadly I don't think that's the problem. And he's going to a manager who needs tactical intelligence, and broadly a lot of people said that wasn't exactly his first port of call for what people said, and it was a lot of his recovery pace that served him really well.
But
sure, get your move.
You know, he did still retain his place under Pep for so many years.
Yeah, because he had no other option.
He can play. He can play as a right-sided centre back.
But they've got Pavard there.
Yeah,
they do have Pavard there.
And
But
they've got
as a backup
as a right wing back. I just don't.
They also have Darmian at right wing back. I mean, yeah, I think.
They need to start thinking about their centre-backs, because, I mean, the way Bastoni's playing, he feels like he's definitely going to move at some stage, no offence to Inter fans, and Acerbi's like 36, 37, and I think De Vrij out of contract. Like, you don't sign Kyle Walker to fix those issues.
No.
I think they can do better.
I think it's a rumour which his agent or someone has put out there and gone, this will get us a move.
Inter are too smart for that. Milan would 100%
Well,
sign.
Milan offered him a 2.5-year
contract.
If
Rashford, if Rashford is off, then they have that space in the squad for a non-EU player, and maybe Walker is there as the Emerson upgrade. That's all
Milan
from me.
By the end of the window, to who?
Great city though. Walker, yeah.
That's it from me.
I like
Those
the
are all
little
my
quick fire
fires. Yeah,
rounds. That was really good fun. Thanks, Mikey. And thanks for another Lowdown episode, guys. Make sure you get in the comments and let us know which shock transfers we should have talked about, what you thought of our potential destinations, whether you think those are actually going to happen. And massive thanks to Mr. Lawrence McKenna.
Oh, thanks for having me. I do love
this show.
Excellent
addition. Thank you very much. And yeah, you're very polite about the show as well. You'll be back.
No, I hope so.
Yeah, we'll take you up on that. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for next week. Stay across all of Sky's transfer news, and we'll catch you then. Bye-bye.